Hey, my name is Brian Curtis, and I'm the founder of Decentralized Systems. And today I have John K. Thompson with me and Tony Martinelli. Is that how you pronounce your last name?
Martignetti.
Okay,
Close.
Martignetti. Sorry about that. Thanks, guys, for coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having us.
So before I
Thank
get
you.
started, I have to thank Craig James, my last podcast guest, who's the CEO of Berry House Coffee. He sent me 4 bags of coffee, and I got them yesterday. It's going to be pretty hard to live up to his standards. So, if you guys have anything that you want to send me, go ahead. But, it's pretty hard to beat 4 bags of fresh organic coffee.
Yeah.
Well, by tomorrow, will have written an AI system that is the equivalent of the Terminator, and I'll send that to you.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that could beat it, especially if you could configure it to get me more coffee.
Yes, well, that's all they're good for.
All right. All right, John, we'll start with you. I'd like to hear how you got into AI and, what drives you, where you see that is going. But just go ahead and let us know.
Sure. Yeah, I got out of college with a computer science degree about 38 years ago, and I started working. I was building systems for, big corporations in the United States. And about 2 years into it, I just realized everything that I did, came down to data. Everything was around data. And I started talking to people about it, and it seemed like I was an alien and nobody really understood what I was talking about. So I moved into decision support and business intelligence and data mining, and I just kept moving through and staying on the leading edge of it. And finally, I ended up at artificial intelligence. So it's been something that I just thought the world would always go this way, that everything would be data centric, and we would be building all sorts of systems on top of it that would drive increasing levels of insight and intelligence. So it just seemed natural to me.
Cool. And that kind of supports what I'm doing. I'd like to ask you the same question. How do you get a lot of data, but how do you support which data is validated for maybe whatever application you're collecting data for? Because data mining is easy, right? There's so much data in today's environment, but deciding which data is applicable for whatever application that you're using it for, how do you guys decide that? Is that AI based or people based?
Well, right now it's people based. It's really an art, and Tony, I'll let you jump into here in a minute or two. I'll stop talking, believe me. Right now, artificial intelligence and data science is really an art. And the people that are really good at it are exceedingly good at it. And it generally comes down to what's called feature engineering. My 4th book that I'm getting ready to sign a contract with Wiley to write is on moving from correlation, which is where we are now. Everything that we do is based on correlation. This is correlated to that. It's as simple as that. It's statistical relationships and inference. But we are going to move into causality. So that's my 4th book, is moving from correlation to causality. And that is a true science. So, if you can hang on for a little while, Brian, we'll end up with systems that actually go through all the features and all the relationships and come back and tell you with clarity and actual causality that out of the 2,000 things you were considering, these 2 are the ones you want to look at.
Cool. Well, I'll get to you, Tony. I don't want to have get drowned out there, but so how did you get into coaching, and how long have you been doing it?
Yeah. So first of all, I love what John was sharing, because there's something about what John shared, which I'll bring back into my world. How did I get into coaching? I spent about 25 years in the biotech space and was working in finance and strategy. So dealt a lot with numbers in that time, and eventually found myself in this place where people would tell me, gosh, you're not the typical finance person. I'm like, what is a typical anything, really? And I had this moment where I finally had gotten to this breaking point, a point, what I call it a flash point, where I just said, I think I've had enough. I think I've had enough of doing the work that I was doing. I need to follow my true calling. And I decided to get up and walk out of a boardroom and do what was in my heart. It came from this place of seeing the leaders in the room focused on more caring about what their own self-interests were, their image, and not really doing what was in the best interests of the people in the room. And here we are in an industry that saves lives, right? And we should be inspiring people. We should be caring about what it takes to light them up to do the work that they're doing. That was not happening. So I decided I'm done. I want to do the work that helps leaders to connect with who they really are. And I want to make a connection to what John was talking about, because I love dealing with the idea of science and art coming together. And, when I think about the idea of looking at the data, I have to separate all the data and look through what is the key thing that's underlying all the data, what's on the surface data that I'm receiving through the conversations that I have with people. And oftentimes it takes some time to slow down and say, what's really important? So a lot of my coaching conversations, I'm talking with a lot of analytical people who I have to get them to slow down and say, what is it that's really underneath all of this? What's the most important data point that we need to be looking at? And that's what's really interesting when I heard John mention where he's coming from.
So what's your primary coaching audience? Do you do executives or just broad spectrum companies of any size?
So I work a lot with executives, but mostly in the tech sector, biotech, and also in software and AI. So that's my sweet spot. I work across the leadership team, mostly senior director and above. But most of all, what I found is that for me, it's important to work with companies that are making a difference through the use of technology.
Yeah, I can understand that. I came from, my background was working in different companies, and the reason I left is the exact same reason that you left. I just saw so much dysfunction in those environments. And you're working in a business that is trying to help the public, but it's not able to because the connections inside that business are breaking down. And I just wanted to create systems and tools to fix that process, right? You'll never get rid of coaches. There's, you have to have coaches. I have a coach. I think everybody should have a coach, even a coach, just because, you always have days where you just need somebody to pick you up, say, hey, get after it, right? You always got to have somebody there for you. But what are your thoughts on that, John? Do you have any coaches?
I'm very fortunate. I'm married to a coach, so I'm probably the most coached person in that you'll meet. My wife of 28 years is a career development coach and someone who's studied integral theory and all sorts of wide ranges of different approaches and methodologies, and she's done a great job of bringing all those together and integrating them. So yeah, I have one downstairs.
I'm sure she coaches you on more than just work too, right?
Oh yeah.
We won't go there, but
Yeah.
So I have a question for you. I'm not sure if you're aware of the system I'm building, but I am building a decentralized decision-making system so that people can decide what data is valid. And so it kind of goes in line with what you're doing. And my idea is so that people could put in suggestions or ideas and access an AI network at the same time, and then input that into a larger group so that groups can validate what things are valid. Before we started our talk here, I kind of mentioned the American Medical Association, right?
Mm-hmm.
All of us have witnessed where maybe a doctor would like to prescribe a treatment for you, but it's not covered by insurance. And the insurance companies have only, got so many things that they can cover. Wouldn't it be nice if we had doctors as a whole deciding what treatments are valid and what things can be covered by insurance or Medicare, instead of a centralized group somewhere that isn't really connected to the doctor community or the medical community as a whole. Mm-hmm. So, and that's just one example, right? You could use the legal industry or any of the other ones. What are your thoughts on that?
It's intriguing. Everything in this whole area of analytics and AI comes down to the data. So, it's hard to have a system validate the data. Usually that's a human kind of crowdsourcing kind of thing. Right. That you want people to do that. There are some stories, that come out that, IBM Watson, and these are not positive stories, but, they trained most of their systems on data in the United States. And then they started taking the systems to Northern Europe And the doctors in Northern Europe look at disease states and, whole health and life in a different way. So when the systems were deployed in Northern Europe and started to use data in Europe, they didn't work. They came out with all sorts of crazy outputs, and the doctors would look at it and say, this makes no sense. This is not how we prescribe. This is not how we treat. These are not the approaches we use to bring people back to states of health. So, usually if you're looking to AI to validate the data, that's a tough place to start, because AI isn't very good at that. Usually you end up starting with, as you said, a crowdsourcing environment, or many people. You said many people, I said crowdsourcing, with their eyes on the data, giving up votes and down votes and ranks and ratings and those kind of things. And then once you have a corpus that you feel good about, you can take that forward and you can use that as a way to rank and validate, from a machine perspective, data in the future. But usually you have to start out with something that, somebody with wetware has looked at, or many people with wetware have looked at it and said yes or no.
So are you using AI as just a informational or just a tool to help the human component, where people can input something and then just see in the past, how that data was treated in the past on a human level? Or does the AI keep track of it historically like that?
AI can keep track of it historically. You can score it and you can predict the future, but you do need good data to start to train the system. And then once you've got that, then you have a fair idea of where you're going. Now, of course, you need to retrain and, open your models and retrain them and keep them, in the realm of reasonability. But you do need to start somewhere. And that's usually with somebody with expertise.
Right. Yeah. So how does that apply to much of your work, Tony? You talked about, data mining and some of the tech companies that you deal with. Do you coach people as to, what data you believe that they should think is relevant, or what they should be using, or what tools to implement as a, maybe a leadership example to, implement the right data in the right teams?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned this. So first of all, there's two fronts on this. Number one is using the right data to track for themselves, to understand how they're moving forward in their work, to know what metrics to follow, to understand which ones are going to be important to them. Not all information is equal, right? And so it's important when I'm working with them to understand what is important to you, what is important to your organization, what is important for you to know that you're making progress. So there's one factor, but also when we're talking about their business, I often get them to think, what are the things that move a needle for them in terms of the data that's important for them to look at. Oftentimes there's a lot of hidden data inside of the organization that they're not really utilizing. So I'll ask them to look at it from a different angle. One of the things that I'm really keen to work with people on is to see new possibilities in what they're doing. Because we get stuck in these patterns, and oftentimes the patterns that we're working on, as in our businesses and on ourselves, they just blind us to what's right in front of us. And so my saying around this is that expand your vision, narrow your focus. Sometimes we got to step away from the data, step away from what we're looking at, and see what's on the periphery. Allow ourselves to see a new perspective, and then dive in and say, okay, then now we're going to narrow ourselves down so we can actually focus on what's important, whether that's a new goal, new data points, new things that are going to be important so that they can actually move forward on that project.
Yeah, I just got done making a series of videos where I talk about how meetings in themselves, especially in leadership positions, whether it's middle management or executive management, block data and block information from coming in from, rest of the points of the company. Do you have any techniques or tools that you give people to make sure that they are getting the right data from the right places? Because in my experience, the best data is usually the stuff that you don't see, that's coming from the perimeter of whatever organization you're on. The people that are connected to product and consumer are actually the ones getting you the most reliable data.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you mentioned this, because it's exactly where people are blinded, is that this sense of, where I sit I'm not getting the raw deal, the real deal of what's going on. And so you have to get out and ask the questions, what am I not seeing that I should be seeing? And that might mean, disrupting your view of the world by getting out and talking to different people. And that might require getting outside your organization, having conversations with people who are in different industries, and seeing what are the trends, what are the things that you're seeing that might affect my industry, my company, my view of the world. And so why when, having John here and myself, this is a nice cross section of different worlds coming together. We need to have that divergent thinking coming together and exploring ideas.
I'll point that question at you, John. How have you had that question, or maybe tried to overcome that obstacle for other companies that maybe are looking for data where they're just not getting data? Maybe they don't have the right relationships with the right people in their company to get the right data at the right time, so that they're not building parts that they're not selling right at the same time, or they're just not talking to the right people at the right time.
Yeah, it's an interesting time, in analytics, advanced analytics, and artificial intelligence. We're moving from statistics into predictive and prescriptive analytics, and then simulation and optimization. They're really intriguing topics right now. And one of the threads that runs through that, to bring it back to what you're talking about, is that you hear about AI and people training AI on trying to recognize, chihuahuas versus muffins and buses and things like that. And, and it's useless. Into some, I mean, it's interesting, right? Interesting research, but, a billion images of yellow school buses laying on their side and tipped on their nose and on their back and upside down and all that kind of stuff. There's very little value there except for a research project. So what we talk about is that, we want to use an ensemble of data. We want to use many, many, many different sources of data, and it may not be that big. You may have a trillion images of buses, okay, whoopee, but we're trying to build analytical models that mimic human reasoning to some extent. We're not looking to build, artificial general intelligence. That's not our goal. But, if you think about it, each of us get up in the morning and we usually are, taking data from our body. Oh, I have to go to the restroom, or I want some coffee, or it's cold outside, or look outside and see the weather, or listen to the radio, or watch some television, or, listen to your dog or your daughter or whatever. You're taking inputs auditorily and visually and internally and from all sorts of sources. And you're making decisions on that on the fly. And that's what really needs to happen with artificial intelligence, is we need to start bringing in all these different data sources. And it is a problem in organizations that when you get to a certain level, vice president, senior vice president, executive vice president, C-level, you tend to, narrow your inputs. The organization, tells you what you're going to get from, the rest of the organization up, which is, and most people don't think about that they are getting a pre-digested feed of what's happening in the organization. So what my team ends up doing is we partner with all sorts of executives and managers, and we tell them, we're going to work with your subject matter experts. You're going to tell them that they're going to work with us, and we are going to bring in all sorts of internal and external data. And we are going to be looking at your business and the way you do things differently. And that kind of freaks them out a little bit. But generally, once we do, our exploratory data analysis, where we bring all this together, put it together and show them how the business actually works in practice this day today, it's an eye-opening experience for many people. But it comes down to bringing in lots of different data sources, integrating them together, and looking at them a little bit differently than you have in the past.
Yeah, I like the way you worded that, because it comes down to all of our perspectives are fairly narrow. And a larger organization works just like a smaller one, right? You go through life and your subconscious is kind of coloring your experience, and then you're making decisions according to that, your past experiences and the data and how it's getting filtered through your own biofield. A company's no different, right? The people that went through their experiences and how they're trying to run that company is getting filtered through their experiences. And if it's not broad enough and they're not talking to enough people, then the data gets colored and they're not really seeing the full picture. I think on an individual level, you're growing the same way a big company's growing in that same aspect. So that was very well worded. Thanks.
Thank you.
And Tony, is that a good explanation? Did I cover that very well, or how would you comment?
Well, I really liked what John mentioned, and there's something about this, which is, just this sense of keeping things expansive as opposed to trying to close them, so quickly. We oftentimes are felt like, okay, well, we want to make sure we narrow it down because that means we're coming to closure. But the idea is you want to keep as open as possible for as long as possible on certain things so that you can ensure that you have the right solution for a problem. That's how, good innovation happens. Like, if you just try to get everyone to be aligned as quickly as possible, then you're going to limit. I got some dogs barking here. Sorry.
I can't hear it.
They agree. But you limit the innovation by getting to agreement too quickly.
Yeah. If you don't take in all the data and just make quick decisions, then yeah, exactly. But then the problem there in my eyes, if you're sitting in meetings all day long, you're not getting the data at the same time, right? So there's this catch-22 where if you take too long to get the data, you're blocking data, the real-time data that you might need to make that decision. So it's a very difficult scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's where the process has to be really robust enough, where you say, like, what is our process for going through this? We want to make sure we invite the right people into the conversation. We invite the right information into the conversation, but we don't necessarily, rush to a conclusion. So simply that we're getting there so quickly that it's going to block out information that could be helpful.
Yeah. Knowledge is power. The more
Yeah.
knowledge you have, the more powerful your company can become, or even as an individual, right? The more knowledge we obtain, the more we're able to do, and our bigger view of the world becomes, the more people we meet and the more information we get. Yeah. So I'll ask one more question for each of you, and I'll start with you, John. We talked about this a little bit before we started, but do you have any stories that maybe some real success stories of applied analytics that helped a company overcome an obstacle a lot quicker than they could have, maybe if they didn't have, tools that you're providing or what you're talking about?
Yeah, lots of them.
Take a favorite.
It's I've worked in 20 different industries, and around the world, and I think the one that I think is most fun, or well, it's probably not fun. It's most valuable, socially redeeming, I guess is a way to say it, is that we partnered with a gastrointestinal surgeon at the University of Iowa, John Cromwell. And John really felt that there could be a better way to understand and prevent surgical site sepsis. So in most surgeries, an appendectomy costs, $100,000, $150,000 to do. And then if you develop post-surgical sepsis, it's $300,000 when you go back in the hospital to, get that fixed. So we built a system that took in the vital signs of the patient while they're on the table, the humidity of the room, the light in the room, things that the surgical team might have done that were outside the sterile procedure. And using that system for 3 years, they knocked down the incidence of post-surgical sepsis by 74%. Saved lives, saved a lot of money, made a lot of people healthier and happier quicker than it would have been otherwise. So I think that was a good application of technology, data, and artificial intelligence.
It's really interesting that you bring that up, because if you would have maybe sold that to my doctor when I was 14, I wouldn't have gone through what I had to go through when I was 14.
Yeah,
my appendix swelled and blocked off my lower intestine, and they couldn't tell if it was, an appendix, a swollen appendix, or I was constipated. And it got to where it was critical. They rushed me to the hospital, and then it burst before they got me into surgery. And so I spent a week in the hospital, with sepsis. And I think I went from, I think I just turned 15, and I went from around 170 pounds to 115 pounds in 7 days.
Ouch.
It was an ugly experience, the worst experience I've ever had in a hospital or any kind of health situation. But
Yeah.
it was just wrongly diagnosed, right? If they would have correctly diagnosed it early enough and got me into surgery fast enough, I wouldn't have had to go through that. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I can totally understand that one.
Yeah.
So Tony, you have any good experiences, any past experiences where somebody came to you and said, hey, thanks for, what you did for me, or, maybe just a good company experiences where they got data at the right time and good coaching?
Yeah, I'll share a story that I can't really share the who, because it's these are always a little bit sensitive, but I'll just share a story that was recent. So I was working with a biotech company that is in the oncology space, and they had a setback in their data. They were working on phase 2 data, and it was going to be really important information that was going to inform their next step. And at the same time, they were starting to scale and build their team up. The challenge was the CEO was starting to see this data readout, and it was going to be negative. It wasn't going to be one that was going to help them to move to that next stage of development. So as we were talking and meeting to find out what to do next, or how he was going to deal with the conversation, which he knew he was going to have around the runway, I helped him to think through the strategy of how are you going to ensure that the people who are going to stick around are going to be feeling comfortable about their motivation to stick around, and the people who are not going to be around, how are you ensuring that you respectfully help them to move forward? So we had some conversations about what is the right messaging and the ways to connect with people in a real authentic way. And I feel like he handled it well, and really got people to see that, at the end of the day, the patients are the most important part of this story, and we're doing the best we can. Failures are inevitable in this space, and sometimes you have to just do the right thing for all people involved. And I feel like everyone walked away with a feeling of, this is just the way it is, and we have to be okay with the decisions we're making. And they're all connected really well. The people who have left are, they found jobs, most of them, and they've stayed connected to the people who were at the company. So it's great.
That's a good story. I mean, what's the message is just basically trust yourself and put your care towards what really matters in those situations.
Yeah, and don't get bogged down with the nervousness of the message. As long as you're authentic and real with the people who are there, they understand that at the end of the day, we have a purpose. We're united by the purpose of serving the patients.
Yeah, I like that. Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. You guys have been a blessing to have on the show, and we will keep in touch, I'm sure.
All right. Thank
you so much.
And thanks again, Craig James, for Berry House Coffee.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
See you guys.
Take care.